Once again, the truth proves elusive when we are dealing with Iran's unpredictable regime. I refer to a New York Times article that is entitled, "Iran's Nuclear Stockpile Grows, Complicating Negotiations." Among elements of the article, and I know that the article is being disparaged by the State Department, I'll talk about that in a moment, but among elements of the article is the fact that Iran's stockpile of nuclear fuel has increased about 20% over the last 18 months of negotiation. Increased 20% in the last 18 months of negotiation. Now, in essence, we are to be convinced that Iran will have to shrink its stockpile by 96% in a matter of months if a deal is signed, even while it continues to produce new material and has demonstrated little success in reducing its current stockpile. And I'm reading from the Times article. It goes on to say, in part, that means that Iran would have to rid itself of more than 9 tons of its stockpile in a matter of months. Now, this is a continuing challenge that we have as we look at these negotiations. We are supposedly in the final month. The end of this month is when we are hopefully going to come to some type of an agreement. And we see what has been a challenge from the very beginning. It is a challenge that I have cited time and time again. How much of these numbers are done because of Iran's desire to push the numbers upwards? Is that for a political purpose? Is it for a negotiating purpose? Is it for technological inability? Whatever it is, the numbers published Friday by the International Atomic Energy Agency, the independent agency for which so much of the joint plan of action and any future agreement that might be consummated, this is the entity that we are depending upon. Well, this entity said that Iran has continued to enrich uranium aggressively, even though it knew that it was not meeting its goals of converting its stockpile into reactor rods. Now, this is a real question that I have. And then another independent group, the Bipartisan Policy Center, said in February, Iran has failed to do the conversion. Now, we knew from the beginning that it was going to be difficult for the Iranians to blend down rather than ship out because they have this aversion to shipping out. This is all possible if they would ship out, but they have consistently said that they will not ship out their fuel. And we knew that it would be a concern if they weren't able to do what they pledged to do, and frankly, I am concerned. I'm concerned that this is just another diplomatic sleight of hand by an untrustworthy negotiating partner. I'm concerned that Iran is still saying it will not ship out excess low-enriched uranium, but rather blend it down and store it. And I'm concerned that this is more of an issue than the administration is willing to concede, particularly if there is no deal. And we, in essence, with sanctions relief, paid them to convert, and they say, and then they walk away with massive amounts of low-enriched uranium that can be fed into their centrifuges and converted to highly enriched uranium. Let's be clear, the tracking and verification of uranium mines and mills, which were often talked about as part of why we will have a safeguard if there is a deal, to centrifuges only works if Iran gets rid of its stockpile. It doesn't work any other way. The New York Times has identified a real problem with the mechanisms being used to control Iran's nuclear stockpile. The simplest solution would be to ship Iran's stockpile out of the country. This would prevent any questionable buildup of material. However, Iran has refused to do this, at least to this date publicly, and opened the potential for Iranian manipulation about what is going on. Now, there may be technical reasons for the 20% increase in low-enriched uranium, but one certainly has to wonder, are they delaying? Are they really having problems building a conversion facility, something I specifically expressed concerns about early in the process? Or is this simply another attempt to play fast and loose with the truth, cover it up and buy time? Is it a negotiating posture? So as they come closer and closer to the deadline, they have all of this enriched uranium, and there is this compulsion to strike a deal, not a good deal, but a deal at any cost. And while this may not be a technical violation of the joint plan of action, the Iranians were supposed to have reached the agreed upon goal. The fact is, midway through the process, we are told there could be a delay, but clearly the timetable has slipped even further away. Now, I know that the State Department has gone after the article, which in part is based by facts from the International Atomic Energy Administration. The administration has gone out of their way to attack the premise of the article, because I guess anything that would upset the fundamental belief that we have to have a deal at any cost is problematic for the State Department. But I have to be honest with you, as I read it, the State Department's response, it means to me, their main response appears to be that Iran is not in technical violation of the joint plan of action because it still has a month left to transform all of the extra low-enriched uranium that it's created in recent months into oxide. This pushback is pretty much something that we should have expected because it's the only argument that the administration actually has available to it to explain this. And it's the same argument they used when many of us were raising the concerns that Iran was busting through their oil export caps set under the joint plan of action every month. And we were consistently told, well, next month the Iranians will ship even less, and therefore it will all even out. Well, the fact of the matter was when time ran out, the exports of Iran remained way above what was allowed. And then the administration shifted to an explanation only to suggest that certain types of oil just don't count. There's always a reach here to try to get a justification for Iran. Now, I think the State Department's response totally misses the point of the New York Times article. The upshot of the piece isn't that there's no way for Iran to meet its joint plan of action obligations in theory. In theory. It's that Iranians have stockpiled so much low-enriched uranium that it's all but impossible for them to meet those objectives in practice. The Iranians may have calculated that they don't have to do so, and that the administration isn't about to blow up an impending nuclear deal over violations of past agreements if those violations bear directly on Iranian intentions and capabilities to implement the agreements. Now, there's another group which has been before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. When I was the chairman, we called them several times. I think Senator Corker has the new chair, has a deep respect for them as well, the Institute for Science and International Security. And they posted their analysis of this specific question. Will Iran be able to meet its obligations regarding its 5% low-enriched uranium? And in the response to that question, the Institute for Science and International Security, David Albright, who is arguably one of the most respected voices on Iran's nuclear program, comes to this conclusion, quote, Iran has fallen behind in its pledge to convert its newly produced low-enriched uranium hexafluoride into oxide form. There are legitimate questions about whether Iran can produce all the requisite LEU oxide. Iran is fed a total of 2,720 kilograms of 3.5% low-enriched uranium hexafluoride into the EUPP, the method by which they the vehicle by which they ultimately have the conversion, but it has not fed any 3.5% low-enriched uranium hexafluoride into the plant since November of 2014, November of last year. By the end of June, they go on to say, in order to meet its commitment under the Joint Plan of Action, Iran must finish converting the 2,720 kilograms of low-enriched uranium into oxide and introduce it into that vehicle and convert into oxide. Now, they go on to say, thus Iran has clearly fallen behind in its pledge under the Joint Plan of Action. Now, on a policy level, the Institute's analysis emphasizes that Iran's refusal to meet its obligation, quote, show the risk posed by relying on technical solutions that have not yet been demonstrated by Iran. So technical solutions that we say, if in fact they can do this, this may be part of our way in which we can strike a deal, but those technical solutions have not been demonstrated by Iran of being capable of meeting those technical solutions. Tehran is under sanctions and in the middle of negotiations, and yet we still can't rely upon it. I think that this is a serious concern, not to be deminimized. This is at the same time that Iran is boarding commercial ships in the Strait of Hormuz, firing at some of them. This is the same Tehran that is in the midst as a country of going ahead and engage in the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, and yet even as we are in the midst of a negotiation where all these things are taking place, and even if we want to wall off all the non-nuclear acts of Tehran that have to worry us and concern us in terms of our national security and international order, as it relates to the nuclear portfolio, they don't seem to be headed in the direction of what is clearly necessary in order to meet their obligations under the Joint Plan of Action. They don't seem, at least at this point in time, to be technically capable of doing that, even though these are the fixes that we are looking for. And at the end of the day, you have to really wonder why we continue to find a way to excuse Iran in every element. We had something that was found independently, reported to the United Nations Security Council Commission that deals with questions, and they were ultimately fueling one of their rods. It was raised, and again, then it was responded to. It was deemed de minimis. We had all the oil exports greater than what they were allowed, and we explained it away saying, well, certain types of oils weren't counted in. We have a set of circumstances where they have raised their fuel capacity, not lowered it, even as they are headed towards an agreement in which they have to dramatically reduce it. So I have a real problem in consistently seeing the willingness to stretch to allow Iran to get where it is today. It is that view that let the world, unfortunately, allow Iran to get to the point of the precipice of having nuclear power that it can convert towards a nuclear weapon. And that is not in the national interest and security of the United States. Mr. President, have the intention in this period of time to consistently come to the floor and raise these issues as they evolve and rear their heads at a critical moments, I think we have to be very committed to knowing the truth here. And while all of us aspire for an agreement that can truly stop Iran's path towards a nuclear weapon, and that be something that's not just limited in time, because the Persians have for 5,000 years been trying to have the power and the hegemonic interest that they have. They are closer to it, from my perspective, than at any other time. And if you already have your people suffering under sanctions as a result of your actions, and you are using the resources that you have not to help your people, but to continue to spread terrorism throughout the region, then you can only wonder, when a deal is struck and large flows of money beginning to return to Iran, what they will do with that money. And it seems to me that you would have a strategy set up to think about that before you even get to a deal, assuming you can achieve a good deal. But when I see them taking actions that, in my view, may not be a technical violation, but are contrary to everything they're supposed to do, when you have independent groups like the Institute for Science and David Albright, when you have the IAEA make these observations, it for me has alarm bells. And those alarm bells are worrying. And Mr. President, I think it is incredibly important on what I believe is one of the most significant national security and international security order questions that will come before the Senate, that we not just look the other way, but we challenge, when these facts continue to come forward, about what is the truth behind them, and what does it mean for any potential agreement, and how we continue to judge Iran's actions in the light of any potential agreement. I know that we're told constantly this isn't on hope, and it's all going to be verified. It's not on trust, but it's all going to be verified. But I have to be honest with you, it depends what you keep defining as what is permissible and not. And from my perspective, where we're headed is not what I think is in the national interest and security of the United States. And with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor and observe the absence of a quorum.